Theodore Roosevelt was one of the most important and accomplished American presidents, and to martial artists, he's one of us. Jiu-jitsu folks love to point out all the flowery and effusive things that Roosevelt was saying about jiu-jitsu. Judo folks love to point out that a lot of the time he was actually talking about judo, but Roosevelt himself did what I wish every martial artist did. He just trained everything. We're going to do at least 2 or 3 other videos about Roosevelt, from his jiu-jitsu training with John O'Brien to his judo training with Yoshitsugu Yamashita, and the martial arts among us will be really interested in the technical details about what he was learning and when and from who and what was jiu-jitsu and what was judo, and I love all that stuff, and I promise we'll talk about it. But this video is going to be a little broader. I want to put in context Roosevelt's martial arts training because it fits in the context of his broader interests in physical culture, what he called the strenuous life. The Strenuous Life was the title of a famous speech Roosevelt gave. My friend Stephen Kesting used it to name his podcast, and it's the title of a great Roosevelt biography that I'll recommend in a second. Because Roosevelt wasn't just interested in martial arts. As the above cartoon suggests, Roosevelt was interested in boxing, in wrestling, in fencing, in hiking, and all sorts of aspects of physical culture. You'll see this I'm telling you this for 3 reasons. First of all, because jiu-jitsu and judo were extensions of the broader physical culture that Roosevelt believed everybody should practice. Second, that this was a guy who had tried a lot of different martial arts, from boxing to wrestling, fencing. So when he tried judo and jiu-jitsu, he knew what he was talking about, and you start to see that when he starts to make thin distinctions between the two. And finally, all of this stuff played an impact not just on Roosevelt, but on American culture more generally in the turn of the century. There are tons of biographies of Roosevelt that focus on one aspect of his life or another, but this is my personal favorite, The Wilderness Warrior, because it's not just about how Roosevelt protected our public lands, but also his passion for outdoor pursuits like hiking, and how he would drag visitors to the White House just out on hikes, and how could you say no to the president? We have national parks today in large measure because of President Roosevelt, and you almost definitely recognize that. But you also know that we have tons of sports in America, and a lot of us play sports, and some of that we owe to Roosevelt too. You can read about that in another one of my favorite biographies of Roosevelt, The Strenuous Life by Ryan Swanson. Presidents changed the culture of their societies using a thing called the bully pulpit, and by the way, that's a phrase that Roosevelt actually invented. During Roosevelt's term, we hosted the Olympics for the first time in America, the World Series was played for the first time, physical education got into mainstream schools for the first time, the NCAA was established, and more. Swanson doesn't focus on martial arts, but this is still a really important book to situate Roosevelt's practice of martial arts in a broader push for athleticism in America, because it included, but not limited to, self-defense practices like jiu-jitsu, judo, boxing, and wrestling, but also included other stuff, from tennis to fencing to you name it. I am far from a Theodore Roosevelt scholar, but I know where to find them, and you can find them online at the Theodore Roosevelt Center website, which is based out of Dickinson State University in North Dakota. There's a ton of resources on this website, more than 100,000 documents related to Roosevelt, including all of the letters that he wrote his son Kermit about jiu-jitsu, including letters that he exchanged with his friend William Sturgis Bigelow about the topic, with John O'Brien, and various other sources. What did all those letters say? Well, that's the next video, but this one is about Roosevelt's broader impact on martial arts and culture. Roosevelt had an affinity not just for the physical arts generally, but the Japanese martial arts specifically, and Michael Cullinane, who is the co-director of the Theodore Roosevelt Center, has argued that this even affected American foreign policy. Roosevelt also affected the way jiu-jitsu and judo were represented in the media, and almost certainly made those representations more positive than they otherwise would have been. You had a bunch of different cartoons and hundreds of news articles from 1900 and 1906 explaining everything Roosevelt did and was interested in. We're going to make several more videos about Roosevelt and his martial arts practice in the next couple weeks, because there's a lot of fun stuff there. We'll talk about how the media covered him and the cool cartoons that they would create with Roosevelt doing judo and jiu-jitsu. We'll talk about his specific work with John O'Brien and what happened at the end of it. We'll talk about his work with the legendary Yoshitsugu Yamashita and other Kodokan judoka. For now, though, I want to leave you with this description that Roosevelt wrote in a letter to his son Kermit. You can, of course, read the whole thing in context at the Roosevelt Center website, but let me give you what I think are the main takeaways. This is 1904, and he's training 2 or 3 times a week with Yamashita and some of the other Kodokan folks, and as you'd expect, he's losing. He describes getting thrown, he describes getting held down, he describes all that stuff that those of us that do judo and jiu-jitsu know all too well. And he says a couple of things that are really significant. First of all, these guys are so skillful that I'm not even injured at all. They're taking care of me. And he tries a stranglehold on one of them, but the other guy got ahead. In this letter, Roosevelt acknowledges the skill of the Kodokan folks. He acknowledges that they could really mess him up if they wanted to. And he kind of acknowledges, yeah, he even let me try my move, but the other guy beat me fair and square. You probably know Roosevelt was a great president. He was a great training partner too. Be like Theodore Roosevelt.